Have you noticed a trend in the more recent Star Trek productions? This year is Star Trek's 60th, so by more recent, I'm talking like last 16, 17 years. From the 2009 reboot movie forward, there are probably multiple trends or patterns I could be talking about, so let me just go ahead and tell you. The writers of these newer Star Trek projects sure have been destroying planets a lot, haven't they? In the 2009 movie alone, we see not only the destruction of the planet Romulus, but also the destruction of the planet Vulcan. Then, just this year, one of the better episodes of the generally excellent new series, Star Trek Starfleet Academy, deals with the aftermath of the destruction of the Klingons' home planet. What's with all the heavenly body busting? Are the writers of Star Trek jealous that their franchise doesn't have an immense superweapon shaped like one of the moons of Saturn? Is it a case of Mimas envy? I don't think so. Well, maybe a little, but I don't think that's the main reason. And if you look back through the history of Star Trek, you'll find this isn't only a recent phenomenon. The scale of planetary destruction and the amount of it we're able to see on screen has definitely increased over the past couple of decades, thanks to bigger budgets and improved special effects. But the creators of Star Trek have been destroying worlds for our entertainment and for more instructive purposes since pretty much the very beginning. Let's examine some of the reasons why Star Trek actually keeps destroying planets. Right up front, I should say that two of the three examples I mentioned already, Romulus and Vulcan in the 2009 Star Trek movie, were not done for instructive purposes and were, in fact, just for our entertainment. Or, for purposes of moving the plot of the movie along. Maybe not for our entertainment, necessarily. I was entertained. I laughed so hard at the destruction of Vulcan that I was asked to leave the theater, which I did not do, by the way. Fun fact, most movie theater employees are nerdy teenagers, and if they tell you to do something, you can just ignore them. They did eventually call the cops, but by the time the pigs got there, the movie was basically over. In your face, Tyler. Anyway, your mileage may vary regarding the destruction of Romulus and Vulcan. Humor is very subjective, but those two are the exceptions. The other examples I'm going to talk about of Star Trek shows or movies destroying planets or showing us the aftermath of destroyed planets all have a message to send or a point to make. And there's no better place to start than the most recent of all, the third of those three examples I already mentioned, the Klingon Homeworld, as seen, or more to the point, not seen, in Star Trek Starfleet Academy. This series is set in the same era as the last three seasons of Star Trek Discovery, the late 32nd century, 800 years after the events of the Star Trek shows and movies produced in the 1990s. The fourth episode of Starfleet Academy's first season, Vox in Excelso, is our first look at how the Klingons are doing in this period of Star Trek future history, and it turns out they're not doing great. As a result of the Burn, a galaxy-wide disaster introduced in Discovery's third season, which also serves as important background for the Academy series, the Klingon homeworld, Kronos, was so devastated that it had to be largely abandoned, reducing the once mighty Klingon Empire to a scattered and dwindling tribe of nomads. The circumstances of the destruction of Kronos and its current condition are not revealed in any detail, but the impression given by the episode is that while the planet itself is still there, it's no longer of much good to anyone who might want to live on it. Why did the writers of Starfleet Academy destroy the Klingon homeworld? Was it because Romulus and an alternate timeline version of Vulcan had already been destroyed and they didn't want the Klingons to feel left out? Maybe, but there's more to it than that. The episode Vox in Excelso isn't about what happened to the Klingons' home planet, but about what happens to them now, and what responsibility the Federation, their former allies and former enemies, has for helping the Klingon people survive. It's a story about a refugee crisis. Klingons are said to be on the brink of extinction. The Federation identifies an uninhabited planet that could serve as a new homeworld for the Klingons and offers to give it to them But the Klingons refuse to accept it because they see it as charity, and they would rather die than accept charity, because Klingons value their pride and their bullshit and constantly shifting concept of honor above even their own lives. Eventually, the Klingons do accept the new planet, but only after Starfleet pretends to fight them for it, so the Klingons can tell themselves they conquered their new homeworld rather than merely being given it. Klingons are buffoons, and that's why I love them. The Federation isn't at its peak following the burn either. Its power and influence are significantly diminished compared to the good old days when Captain Picard was flying around giving weekly philosophy lectures to aliens, but the Federation is a lot better off than the Klingons. And as the stronger, richer, more privileged entity, the Federation sees helping the Klingons as its moral duty. Sometimes Star Trek uses the Federation as a tool of critique. Within the story being told, the Federation represents the United States, or Western civilization in general, and it does something analogous to something that the US or Western civilization has actually done, or is doing, and the point is, this thing is bad. The Federation shouldn't be doing this, and neither should we in real life. Starfleet Academy uses the Federation and Starfleet in this way, sometimes very effectively. But in Vox in Excelso, the Federation isn't being used to critique our real-world governments, it's being used as a role model, to show us how to do better. It's telling that throughout Vox and Excelso, the question being grappled with by the Federation and Starfleet is, how do we help the Klingons, not should we help the Klingons? That the Federation should help the Klingons is taken for granted. The challenges are how to help them, how to offer that help in a way that they will accept, how to respect their culture and traditions and not leave them feeling belittled or condescended to. A nation with the resources to help those in desperate need, but choosing not to, is simply unthinkable in Star Trek. Though not the point of the story, it's implied that the destruction of the Klingon homeworld was due in part to over-industrialization. The burn was an event which caused dilithium to explode, and it's said in Vox and Excelso that exploding dilithium reactors were the cause of so much of the devastation on the Klingon homeworld. The fact that Earth and other established planets are still habitable post-burn seems to imply that the Klingons overdid it a little with the dilithium reactors. Klingons being Klingons, it's safe to assume that the reason they overdid it was to support their military efforts, to fuel their war machine. This is reminiscent of the state of affairs at the beginning of the movie Star Trek VI, where excessive industrialization in support of military operations led to the destruction not of the Klingon homeworld itself, but of a moon which in turn polluted the atmosphere of the Klingon homeworld and set it on a path toward eventually being uninhabitable. The Klingons are not the only people we meet in Star Trek who suffer a disaster at home for being too warlike. In the second season of the original Star Trek, Captain Kirk and the crew of the Enterprise encounter a nearly unstoppable weapon designed for the purpose of destroying entire planets in the episode The Doomsday Machine. By the time our heroes catch up to the planet killer, it's done most of its planet killing already. It has recently devoured most of an entire star system and rendered one of the Enterprise's sister ships, the Constellation, an immobile wreck in the process. This star system wasn't inhabited, but the planet killer is on course for another system that is home to millions of people. Also, this weapon is ancient and seems to have originated in another galaxy. Who knows how many worlds it has devoured and how many billions of lives it has taken throughout its existence. The good guys are finally able to disable the planet killer when Captain Kirk gets the wreck of the Constellation working well enough to fly it down the throat of the weapon, then overloads its engines. Kirk barely escapes before the ship explodes, and the victory comes only after the loss of the entire crew of the Constellation, including its commander, Commodore Decker, but the threat of the planet killer is neutralized. Why did Star Trek destroy all those planets and make that poor man cry like that? The planet killer is a pretty obvious metaphor for the atomic bomb. Like Godzilla, only larger and with less personality. This episode, The Doomsday Machine, was produced in the late 1960s, when the Cold War between the United States and its allies and the Soviet Union was ongoing, and the tensions between those two nuclear-armed states were a cause of constant global concern. The planet killer is described as a weapon of last resort, a weapon which was designed as a deterrent more than for actual use, a weapon so devastating that if it were ever to be deployed to its full potential, it would be just as disastrous to its creators as to their enemies. Once activated, the planet killer took on a life of its own, and the destruction it wrought stretched far beyond anything its creators ever intended or perhaps even imagined. By the time the crew of the Enterprise encounters the planet killer, the conflict it was made for is long over, the people who made it are forgotten, and this fearful weapon, this bringer of death to countless billions, is their only legacy. We never get to meet the creators of the planet killer. We never even learn their exact fate. Were they destroyed by their own weapon, or did it merely escape from their control? Even so, they remind me of another civilization from another Star Trek episode whose fate we do learn, and who we do get to meet. Well, we get to meet a couple of them. Anyway, in the third season Star Trek episode, Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. The metaphor here, as all of you who have seen this episode well know, is even more in your face than in the Doomsday Machine. Only this time, the society-destroying weapon isn't a bomb or an enormous and very hungry outer space cigar, but hatred, bigotry, racism. The story follows two natives of the planet Sharon, Lokai and Beale. Lokai is a revolutionary and for the past few 10,000 years has been pursued across the galaxy by Beale, an agent of the government tasked with capturing Lokai and bringing him to justice for his crimes against the government. They are both white on one half of their bodies and black on the other half, but Beale is black on the right side, while Lokai is white on the right side, which in Beale's mind, and apparently in the minds of the other people who are black on the right side, makes Lokai and the others like him inherently inferior. Racism is bad, and it's irrational for people to hate each other over arbitrarily valued superficial differences. Got it? But the episode doesn't stop there. Beale, using the superpowers he apparently has, hijacks the Enterprise to take himself and Lokai back home to Sharon. And when they arrive, they find that during Beale and Lokai's lengthy absence, their respective groups have annihilated each other. Beale and Lokai beam down to the surface to continue their conflict in the ruins of their world, while Captain Kirk observes solemnly that now their hatred is all they have left. In this case, it's not the planet itself that is destroyed, but the people that were living on it. And they were destroyed by themselves, because their mutual hatred for one another, based on nothing but shallow prejudice, consumed them. One of the consistent messages of Star Trek, going back to the very earliest days of the franchise, is that in order for humanity to achieve the sort of peace and prosperity depicted in Star Trek, it must rid itself of racism, sexism, xenophobia, all forms of bigotry. The other, darker side of the message is, if we refuse to do the work to free ourselves from our bigotry, we could wind up just like the people of Sharon. Intolerance allowed to spread unchecked by reason or compassion can be just as deadly to a civilization as an arsenal of nuclear weapons. The heroes of Star Trek, the original series, are seemingly always running across thematically significant planetary ruins. Another example is the planet the crew encounters in the episode Return to Tomorrow. Spock determines that the planet was once Earth-like, but its atmosphere was stripped by a cataclysm that is eventually revealed to have been a war that rendered the planet uninhabitable. When the Enterprise arrives, the planet is dead. Its only residents, a handful of survivors whose consciousnesses have been preserved in a disembodied state inside spherical receptacles. The planet the Enterprise visits in Return to Tomorrow is said to have once been the center of an interstellar empire. Thousands of years ago, they spread out into the galaxy, exploring and colonizing. Now, that mighty empire is three people who exist as talking globes. The plot of the episode is quite silly and focuses mostly on the surviving inhabitants convincing members of the Enterprise crew to volunteer their bodies to be possessed so these disembodied people can escape their globes. Hey, it's Star Trek, baby. Shit's gonna get wacky. But the backstory, the events that put their minds into those globes, collapsed their empire, and ruined their planet, is clearly meant to conjure ominous possibilities in the minds of the audience. Captain Kirk even references how close humanity came to its own destruction due to nuclear weapons, though he adds, we found the wisdom not to destroy ourselves. There's that Star Trek optimism. The fates of the people in the Mind Globes and the inhabitants of Sharon are pretty bleak, but at least their planet still exists in a physical sense. The Xindi, the aliens who serve as the main antagonists of the third season of Star Trek Enterprise, can't even say that. In the episode The Shipment, Captain Archer is chatting with Greylock, an arboreal, one of the several separate species that comprise the Xindi, and Greylock's like, yeah, there are 5 different kinds of Xindi, but there used to be 6. The 6th one was wiped out when our planet exploded a few hundred years ago. That was a bummer. For all of us, but mostly for them. The story Greylock tells of how the Xindi homeworld was destroyed is a familiar one. The various Xindi species, the arboreals, the aquatics, the primates, the insectoids, the reptilians, and the avians, made war against each other for a century, their alliances constantly shifting, the reason they were even fighting getting lost in the chaos. 2 of the factions, the reptilians and the insectoids, set off bombs beneath fault lines which pulverized the planet, reducing it to the field of rubble Enterprise encounters at the start of the season. The destruction of their homeworld not only scattered the surviving Xindi species to other planets in the region, it also left them vulnerable to manipulation by the time-traveling sphere builders, who convinced the Xindi to help them destroy Earth in the 22nd century by warning them that humanity would destroy a future Xindi homeworld in the 26th century. This isn't just one planetary destruction, it's the start of a cycle. The Xindi destroy their own planet, which leads to them attempting to destroy another planet, Earth, because they've been warned that humans will someday destroy their new home planet. That cycle wasn't allowed to complete. Captain Archer and the Enterprise crew stopped the Xindi from building their ultimate weapon and thwarted the plot of the sphere builders, and that was a good thing for the people of Earth, obviously, but for the Xindi as well. You just know if they had succeeded in blowing up Earth, before too long, the sphere builders would have shown up again, like, hey guys, you'll never believe this, but now the Idosians are totally going to blow up your new home planet. It doesn't happen for a few more 100 years, but still, you'd better get cracking on another one of those weapons. And after that, it's, guys, I hate to tell you this, but you need to build another weapon. Yeah, it's the Ligonians. They're going to destroy your new home planet in, let's say the future, okay? Can you believe this shit? They're assholes, though. Like, seriously, don't even feel bad. Yeah, they're all black, but it's not like that. It's not a race thing. I'm the least racist sphere builder you'll ever meet, okay? Ask anyone. Eventually, the Xindi catch on that they're being fucked with, and they stop building weapons and blowing up planets just because the sphere builders tell them to. And one day, somewhere around the 26th century, those pricks from that gangster planet blow up the Xindi's new homeworld to make room for another one of their mob-owned space casinos. Everybody knows this story. It's the aliens who cried planet killer. The creators of Star Trek Discovery devised another variation on the franchise's planet killer trope. In that show's very good, then bad, then very good again right at the end, 4th season, the crew of the Starship Discovery confront a massive and seemingly unstoppable gravitational disruption called the Dark Matter Anomaly, or DMA. The DMA roams the galaxy, destroying and devouring any objects within its far-reaching sphere of influence. At first, it's assumed to be some kind of natural phenomenon, but eventually it's discovered to be the creation of an advanced race of aliens who reside outside the Milky Way galaxy. When our heroes make contact with these aliens, it turns out they didn't mean any harm. The DMA was their method of mining the galaxy for minerals necessary to power a protective shield around their home planet. They didn't realize the planets the DMA was destroying were inhabited by intelligent life forms. This, too, is part of a cycle of destruction. The aliens who made the DMA, called Species 10C, erected the protective shield around their current homeworld because their previous homeworld had been left uninhabitable by a series of asteroid impacts. Their desire to defend themselves against another such threat led them to deploy their technology thoughtlessly. And when representatives of Species 10C learned about the deaths and destruction the DMA had caused, they were greatly grieved and agreed to stop using the DMA. Cautionary tales against racism, war and nuclear proliferation, and the unintended consequences of technology are all great reasons to destroy planets in works of fiction. But the subject touched on most frequently by Star Trek stories that depict wrecked planets is environmentalism. Lots of Star Trek episodes with environmentalist themes involve destroyed, ruined, or seriously threatened planets. Star Trek Voyager's pilot episode, Caretaker, shows us the Ocampa living beneath the surface of their desert world, which was once lush and Earth-like before its ecosystem was inadvertently destroyed by more advanced aliens. The caretaker of the episode's title is one of those aliens who has stayed behind to watch over the Ocampa in an attempt to atone for ruining their planet. On Star Trek Enterprise, the Suliban, who, like the Xindi, are pawns in the temporal Cold War, were forced to flee their homeworld due to environmental changes. Some of the Suliban, who were essentially climate refugees, were radicalized and formed the Cabal, a terrorist organization that acted on orders from this anonymous dude from the future. I mean, he says he's from the future. Do they know? He could just be a guy on a webcam with really shitty resolution. There's a strong environmentalist component to the DMA storyline in Discovery's 4th season as well. One of the planets devoured by the DMA is Quajan, the homeworld of one of the show's main characters, Book. Quajan is an Eden-like world where its humanoid inhabitants live in harmony with nature, and all life is united by the world root, a tree root system that spans the entire planet. Quajan's destruction is devastating to Book, who loses not only his own family and his people, but the thing by which he defined who he was. In Season 5, Book is given a cutting from the world root that had been donated to a space library. He plants the cutting on another planet, and in the series finale, we see it has grown into a beautiful tree, a small part of Quajan living on. When our heroes make contact with Species 10C, Book tells them about the world root. It connected all life on Quajan, he says. Wherever we lived, it reminded us we were all on the same planet, our fates always interconnected. Maybe that's the lesson, if there is one. It's Book who convinces Species 10C to abandon using the DMA. We all live in the same space, he tells them. This is all there is. On Star Trek The Next Generation, the impending environmental destruction of the planet Hikaris II challenges our heroes' assumptions regarding arguably the most important piece of technology they have, warp drive. It plays out in an episode of Season 7 of TNG called Force of Nature. While searching for a missing ship, the Enterprise is boarded by these two, Rabal and Sarova, scientists from nearby Hikaris II. They disable the Enterprise's warp engines in order to get Captain Picard's attention, and when they have it, they drop a bombshell. In the region of space surrounding their planet, warp engines can cause rifts to form where subspace spills into normal space, which is bad. Okay, that's all you need to know about that. It's bad. If something isn't done, eventually the gravitational disruptions to this region of space will render Hikaris II uninhabitable, and the formation of these subspace rifts will make it impassable to any ships. Rabal and Sarova, who are brother and sister, are responsible for the missing ship the Enterprise is searching for. They also disabled a passing Ferengi ship, as well as the Enterprise itself, all in an effort to get someone to listen to them. Geordi, whose whole life revolves around the warp engines, is not at all receptive to the suggestion that they might be ruining space itself, and the rest of the crew is pretty skeptical of Rabal and Sarova's claims as well. Data proposes asking the Federation to dispatch a science vessel to the area to conduct a more thorough study and look for evidence to support Rabal and Sarova's claims, but that's not good enough for Sarova. She's tired of waiting and tired of research. She knows she's right, and she wants action. She's like, you need evidence, motherfucker? I'll show you evidence. She returns to the ship she and Rabal arrived in, flies it off a little way from the Enterprise, and triggers an engine overload, destroying the ship, killing herself, and also creating a big, scary purple subspace rift, just like she predicted would happen. Rabal is traumatized by the death of his sister, but also he's like, you have to admit she was right now. The Enterprise finds and rescues the missing ship they were looking for, but there's no closing that subspace rift, and there's no denying the validity of Rabal and Sarova's theory. Warp drive use is damaging the fabric of space. Geordi is the most shaken by this. He came out the strongest against Rabal and Sarova, and now, after Sarova's death and the creation of the rift, he feels guilty for not taking her more seriously. and for clinging to his biases, formed after years of working as an engineer. After Serova's death, Geordi meets Rabal in 10 Forward and expresses his condolences. "Where do we go from here?" he asks. "We can't look at space travel the same way anymore," Rabal says. "We will have to change." Geordi says, "We depend on warp drive. I don't know how easy that kind of change is going to be." And Rabal says matter-of-factly, "It won't be easy at all." That's as clear and unambiguous a statement on the difficulty and the necessity of convincing people to take environmental issues seriously as Star Trek has ever made. But the episode doesn't stop there. The Federation Council announces that, in response to these events, the Hikarans will be given technology to stabilize their planet's environment in the short term, non-essential space travel in the surrounding area will be restricted, and all Starfleet ships will be forced to observe a Warp 5 speed limit from now on. No one seems very happy with those announcements, and that's the point. The moment calls for permanent transformative change, and the best the Federation can muster is a few relatively minor adjustments intended to slow the ongoing damage. The response feels even more inadequate when Counselor Troy points out that there's no guarantee other galactic powers like the Cardassians or the Ferengi will observe these restrictions. An essential technology has created a threat to everyone's way of life, and an existential threat to the population of the planet Hakaris II, and the reaction from one of the most powerful governments is to barely do anything at all. Because while the damage being caused might be catastrophic in the future, serious efforts to prevent that damage would be inconvenient in the present. And that takes precedence. That is as cynical and brutally realistic a statement on the difficulty of convincing people in power to take environmental issues seriously as Star Trek has ever made. The episode tries to end things on a more hopeful note. Captain Picard expresses dismay at his unknowing contribution to the problems caused by warp drive use, and Geordi reassures him that it's not too late. We still have time to make it better, which is also an important message. But the rest of the episode makes it apparent that while the message is important, the writers of the show don't expect it to be taken seriously. The episode premiered in 1993, and guess what? We didn't take it seriously. We never have. And the problems just keep getting worse and worse, and we still aren't really doing much of anything. Star Trek's ability to predict the future really is fucking uncanny, isn't it? Most stories with environmentalist themes are about urging us to wake up, to take these issues seriously, and demand of our leaders that something be done about them. But one of the most celebrated such stories in the Star Trek franchise isn't really about preventing an environmental catastrophe, but about showing people learning to live in the looming shadow of such a catastrophe and facing their grim fate with courage and grace. In The Inner Light from TNG's 5th season, Captain Picard is zapped by a space probe and wakes up to find himself on the planet Catan. At first, it seems as though he's living someone else's life, but eventually he accepts this life as his own. His name is Kamen, he has a wife, and eventually children, friends, respect in his community. It's not at all like his life as the captain of the Enterprise, but it's a good life all the same. The problem is, Catan is ravaged by drought. And as the years go by, Kamen conducts scientific studies and concludes that Catan's sun is at fault. Increasing solar radiation is causing the drought. And there is no solution. The planet and all of its people are doomed. The realization is a bitter one for Kamen. He urges his daughter to get married, start a family, live her life to the fullest now. Make now the most precious time, he tearfully tells her. Later, Kamen, now an old man, plays with his young grandson, then observes sadly, he deserves a rich, full life, and he's not going to get one. And Kamen is right. There is no salvation for the people of Catan. They cannot save their lives or their world. They do manage to preserve something of themselves, however. A grumpy and reluctant Kamen is dragged along with his family to watch a rocket launch, and he learns that the rocket is carrying the space probe which the Enterprise encountered at the start of the episode. Everything he has experienced on Catan, his entire life as Kamen, has been a vision induced by that probe, so that whoever encountered it would live as one of them. and long after their world was gone, their memory would endure. Picard wakes up on the bridge of the Enterprise and learns to his astonishment that he's only been unconscious for about 25 minutes. His whole life on Catan, raising children and grandchildren, decades and decades and decades, all experienced within about the same amount of time it would have taken to watch an episode of Fuller House. Objectively. Subjectively, watching an episode of Fuller House would feel much, much, much longer. Whenever I mention environmentalism in Star Trek, I have to make sure to acknowledge Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. Not only does it remain one of the most successful and beloved of all Star Trek projects, it wears its environmental consciousness so proudly that people still refer to it as the one where they save the whales. Does it fit with the specific theme of this video? In fact, it does. There is a planet in Star Trek IV that is almost destroyed. Our planet, Earth. Bit on the nose, wouldn't you say? An alien probe shows up and wants to talk to its pals, the humpback whales, and when the whales don't respond to its greeting, the probe immediately starts wrecking the entire planet, which, in all honesty, I find to be a reasonable response. Think about it. You shower, you get dressed, you drag your ass out of the house, drive all the way to their place, and after all of that, you get there and they aren't even home? You should be allowed to burn the house down in that situation. Unless it's my house. Don't you ever burn my house down. Also, don't come to visit. I don't want to see you. Fortunately, good old Jim Kirk and the crew of the once and future Starship Enterprise are around to do a bit of madcap time traveling and bring some whales from the past into the future. But why tell this story at all? Why did the creators of Star Trek IV almost destroy the Earth? To remind us that there ain't no Kirk and Spock coming to save our asses. If our whales go extinct, they're staying that way. If we wreck our planet, if we continue wrecking it, I should say, there is no turning back the clock. The creators of all these Star Trek projects and others I haven't mentioned aren't just raising the dramatic stakes to give the visual effects department something cool to put on screen. Well, usually they aren't. What they are doing is trying to break through our deeply ingrained complacency. Star Trek takes real-world, slow-motion catastrophes like climate change, like resource depletion, like potential mass extinction events, accelerates them, and cranks up the volume, compressing decades of our systemic failure into a single, undeniable cataclysm that the heroes of the story have no choice but to reckon with. Star Trek keeps destroying planets because that is the ultimate disaster. When a planet is being destroyed, that's the worst thing that could possibly happen for the people living there. It's the kind of thing that wakes people up and makes them pay attention. So why isn't it working on us? Oh, hey folks, hope you enjoyed this one. I'm going to let you know what the subject of the next Trek Actually video is going to be, but before I do that, I want to give shout-outs to some of my newest Patreon patrons and channel members. First, the new patrons. They are Devin Liu, thanks Devin. Razzle Dazzle Basil, thanks Razzle Dazzle Basil. Lynn Trinsic, thanks Lynn Trinsic. Jamie Wilson, thanks Jamie. Epsilon is greater than. Thanks, Epsilon is greater than. And now, the new channel members. They are 1KGB. Thanks, 1KGB. Sunlight09. Thanks, Sunlight09. Siler170. Thanks, Siler170. HJ Papal. Thanks, HJ Papal. If you want to support this channel, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Steve Shives or clicking the join button to become a member of this channel. All patrons and members get access to exclusive posts that allow you to vote in the polls that determine upcoming Trek Actually topics and also submit questions ahead of time for my twice monthly Ask Away live streams. If you pledge $5 a month or more on Patreon, or become a member at the $5 a month tier or higher, you get a shout out at the end of a Trek Actually video. If you'd rather give a one-time gift than a recurring monthly contribution, you're always more than welcome to do that by clicking the thanks button right below the video or via PayPal or Venmo. The links for those are in the video description. Many thanks. If you like what I do on YouTube, especially the Star Trek related stuff, you should also check out my side projects, The Ensign's Log, the Star Trek themed comedy podcast that I'm on alongside Jason Harding and Amanda Billings, and Trek Reluctantly, the watch-along stream Dana Cole and I do every Wednesday starting at 6 p.m. Eastern on this channel right here. As always, links in the description. Now, for next month's Regulation Trek Actually topic, there is an argument that Star Trek has been having with itself since almost the beginning. And what makes it even more interesting is it's an argument I don't think Star Trek wants to have, nor does it want us to see it having that argument. But the thing is, the argument is kinda unavoidable. It's not an argument that deals with the nature of Star Trek itself necessarily, but it does deal with the nature of Star Trek's most prominently featured institution. I'm talking, of course, about Starfleet. And I will talk a lot more about Starfleet in next month's video, which will be an attempt to answer the question, is Starfleet actually a military? That's next month. I'll be back then and a bunch of times before then. So until the next time you see me, whenever that is, thanks for watching and take care, everybody.